the future. Calcutta, Kipling's chance-erected, midday halt of a trader by the name of Job Charnock, created its own destiny as one of the greatest cities.
Hello. Hello. Ladies and gentlemen, you are requested to please take your seats. We will start the program in a couple of minutes' time. Thank you. Welcome you all to the 9th edition of the Bengal Chambers in Environment and Energy Conclave. We will request the dignitaries of the session 1 to please take their seats on the dais. Mr. Ambarish Das Gupta, President, the Bengal Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Jonathan Ward, Principal Commercial Officer, US Consulate, Kolkata. Mr. P.S. Bhattacharya, former Chairman and Managing Director, Coal India Limited. Dr. Ajay Mathur, Director General, the Energy and Resources Institute. Sri Shutitto Bhattacharya, Chairman and Managing Director, Coal India Limited. Sri Anil Razdan, former Secretary Power, Government of India. Mr. Deepak Amitav, Chairman and Managing Director, PTC India Limited. Mr. Debashish Gupta, GM Special Projects, CESC Limited. Mr. Santosh Kamath, a partner infrastructure government healthcare KPMG will join us. Mr. Uday S. Mehta, Deputy Executive Director, CATS International. Mr. Shutanu Ghosh, President Designate, the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Mr. Debe Mukherjee, Chairperson, Energy and Environment Committee, the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I will now request Mr. Shubhodip Ghosh, Director General Designate of the Bengal Chamber of Commerce, to introduce the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Angona. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 9th edition of our annual Environment and Energy Conclave. We have instituted this program with an objective, a singular objective in fact, and that to make this into a forum where the best practices are shared and learnt. In fact, I don't know whether many of you had the opportunity to watch the 25-minute video that we played. This was a TED Talk address by the former US Vice President, Mr. Al Gore. And in fact, that was basically played for you because we wanted to set things in perspective for you before we began this year's program. Today, more than ever, the inconvenient truth, which was released years back, is so much in our lives. In fact, that is the reason why we thought when we are structuring this year's program that we should be focusing on the energy and climate synergy with a specific focus on India's clean energy realities for this year's conclave. And that is where we stand today. With respect to the Paris talks, the UNFCCC negotiations, we are on the anvil of a new climate treaty. So therefore, we thought that we should focus on this aspect because we all need to know what is happening. The world is much more dynamic in the realms of energy and environment management than it was ever before in the past. So with that little bit of introduction about where we stand, what we are trying to do, may I request the chairperson of our Energy and Environment Committee, Mr. Debe Mukherjee, to please take the session forward. Sir.
Thank you very much, Shubhodip. A very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to our 9th edition. Shubhodip has already set the tone. May I request our President, Mr. Ambarish Dasgupta, for his opening remarks. Mr. Dasgupta, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My humble respect to all the honorable dignitaries on the stage. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the 9th edition of our annual Environment and Energy Conclave. And it is just not the 9th, it's the most signature event of the Bengal Chamber, and also relates to the, if we identify one single theme on which the whole Bengal Chamber's activities or visions is pivoted on, then this specific event relates to that central theme. Bengal Chamber's continuous endeavor has been to focus on a sustainable development and to disseminate information and educate business, industry, and very importantly the society about the need for a balancing industrial growth with ecological stability. We just do not only focus on a very mad industrial growth by destabilizing the ecological balance, and we have been continuously trying to put all our thought leadership papers, all our seminars to bring a proper balancing between the two. The theme of the activities of a particular year centers also on the relevant growth topics of the year. And interestingly and very pleasantly for us, this is also the topic of the year for the whole country. And towards that, the theme this year is our Energy Climate Synergy, India's Clean Energy Realities. This edition will focus, this 9th edition today as it starts now, will focus on the synergy between the climate and the energy. I will just try to give few of the thoughts that we have captured while interacting with my management committee members, and while interacting with some of the key stakeholders in the energy, in the biotechnology, in the related sector, and I will just try to put down some of my thoughts so that the discussion can be more around those points. While we as a country have embarked on an ambitious renewable energy pathway, coal of course will likely to remain our primary source of energy for the next few decades at least. India hopes to bring down its dependence on coal for electricity production from the current 61% to something around 57% by 2031, and boost the share of the non-fossil fuel to 40% of our total energy mix by 2030. The reason India is dependent on coal is to make sure, of course, that some 300 million people today have access to our electricity. Now, how to get this energy? In its INDC, India has emphasized steep increases in its non-fossil fuel sources, amounting to 40% of electricity capacity by 2030. Research suggests that depending on our assumptions, this will require adding an amount of renewables energy, solar, and will close to the entire size of India's current electricity capacity by 2030. This massive addition will give a huge fillip to the global market also for its renewables. Now, our power sector ecosystem is definitely going, because of all these things, through a transformational phase. The overall deficits in the grid have been steadily dropping as well, and we will hear about this from our power experts during the day. The peak deficit was at 3.2% in 2016 as compared to 10% or more observed typically till recently. But in West Bengal, which is proud of our state anyway, and since it's happening in Bengal, I would really not shy away from making some statements about our state. The peak deficit as compared to the 3.2% was only 0.3% in 2016. According to the CEA report, 18 out of the 36 states and union territories are expected to be power surplus in FY 2017. In addition, we are witnessing, of course, changes in terms of the fuel mix technology policy and government across, and governance of the whole thing across the whole value chain. But such is the challenge of the India's development context that this effort will simply not be enough to meet the country's needs. India has no choice but, as I mentioned, also to turn to coal to improve the life of its people between now and 2030. Review of multiple research studies suggests that the virtual consensus that to meet India's energy needs, coal use will have to increase, although the magnitude of the increase depends on India's future energy demand patterns. Significantly, even with added coal, India's emissions per person in 2030 at about 4 to 5 tons per capita are likely to be less than the current global average of 6.6 tons per capita. Importantly, the projected increase in Indians' emissions is far less than the corresponding figure of 12 tons per capita in 2030 for US and China. The current installed capacity of the Indian system is 300 gigawatt. As India continues to outperform most of the countries of the world in terms of growth, it is expected that we will be having around 800 gigawatt of installed capacity by 2030 if everything goes fine. A substantial portion, as I mentioned, 40% of this will be around the renewable, as India committed in the Paris summit. Clearly, we have a challenging task in hand, balancing not just a dilemma, but a trilemma of security of supply, low carbon and affordability. And solar power is of course getting interesting day by day, but still the lowest solar tariff has touched rupees 4.34 per unit, which is comparable with the coal-based power tariff. At the same time, the price of power from solar rooftops is still hovering around 6.70 per unit, and we need to see that how we actually can bring that down. We have to strike a balance and clearly plan out the solar roadmap for each state and get on with its implementation. Now in this context, coming back to our state again, that higher levels of renewables will stress out our electricity grid and storage and will become increasingly important. In this respect, our state, West Bengal, is leading and is not only having a 900 megawatt of pumped storage in Purulia, another 1000 megawatt of pumped storage is being planned, which would be operated by 1200 megawatt of solar power. As the grid capacity increases, there is a need also to evaluate the possibility of implementation of the grid scale battery storage. Now, to improve the affordability and to reduce the CO2 efficiency improvement is needed in both generation as well as in distribution, and we will be having a lot of representatives, including our Honorable Minister, to hear that what steps are being taken both in the improvement of the generation and in distribution, and there are multiple consulting organizations who are working with them right now. Efficiency improvement of older generation plants will exhibit lower emission and make it more competitive in the power market. For example, the Kolaghat, Bokreshwar, Bandel, which plants are relatively old. Similarly, urgent steps are needed to reduce the distribution losses also, and some of the districts which we have found out where the distribution losses can be reduced are Birbhum, Malda and Murshidabad. And definitely hand in hand with the India's growth plan, I'm seeing our study shows that the West Bengal of course is taking a very leading position today in terms of the distribution and in terms of the generation and also in terms of the alternative energy, particularly in the solar situation. So we are hoping that by 2030 or even earlier to that the West Bengal's position will be the leading position in the power. And when we have moved around the country from an industrial growth perspective and trying to woo investors to the state, both in my capacity as a Bengal Chamber member as well as in my own professional capacity where I work for KPMG, we have seen that the one good thing which every state mentions about West Bengal is the quality of the power. Though there had been some issues on the power pricing which we felt that we would be able to bring it down compared to many other states which we have not possibly been able to yet in every corner of the state. But the power availability and the quality of the power, it's something which has all throughout been India, whoever we have met and whoever has experienced some investments or made some investments here and experienced the West Bengal power has been very appreciated. Now, one of the requests which we had, and I'm making a request to the representatives of the central government and all the high-profile officers from TERI and Mr. Rajdan will be coming in and others, that the India government, of course, in that French President with Francois Hollande at the Paris COP21 Climate Summit, we agreed to an investment of initial $30 million in setting up the alliance's headquarters in India. I wish that considering the West Bengal's progressive steps towards the power, this headquarter, if they could have decided, or if there is an option, if they can still decide to make that power, that capital come in Bengal, and if we can have that alliance's headquarter, we'll be proud to have and give all kinds of cooperation from Bengal to have that headquarter being here. With this thought and with the hope that the government will be seriously considering in light of the West Bengal's progressive power step. I really hope that this event of today, with all the thoughts coming from the best brains in the power, in the biotechnology, in the solar, in the classical or orthodox power, will actually be giving out their futuristic thoughts and also deep dive into the challenges of the country and also of the state. I'm proud to have all of you here, and I look forward to have you all throughout the day, and a very, very good event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambarish, for such a positive input. We now have Mr. Jonathan Ward, Principal Commercial Officer, U.S. Consulate, to speak to us about the inconvenient truth. I think John would have a spin on that, I'm sure. We are indeed very fortunate to welcome the U.S. Consul General, Mr. Craig Hall, who is amidst us. Thank you, Craig, for making it convenient to come and attend this morning's proceedings. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Deb, and I'm going to do my best to have the same kind of energy that Al Gore does. And he's got a few years on me, so I've got to keep up with him. So good morning, Calcutta! In the interest of time, I'm going to dispense with the formalities of acknowledging everybody on the dais. I would just say it's my great privilege and honor to share it with you. When I look at the organizations and governmental bodies represented, each one has been a great partner and friend of the United States government and the United States business community. So thank you for your collaboration and cooperation. I'm here both in a professional and personal capacity, and I'll be very careful to tell you when I'm doing one and the other. As a U.S. government official, I have the responsibility with my team to promote the exports of U.S. technology, goods and services to East India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan. My agency, the United States Department of Commerce, has 7 offices across India. My colleague, Arup Mitra, Arup, would you please stand up? My colleague Arup and I have the shared responsibility for leading the Calcutta office located in the American Center, of course, under the leadership of Consul General Hall. I'd like to also acknowledge the presence of a couple other colleagues, our new Consul for Political and Economic Affairs, Mr. Prasenjit Gupta, who just arrived a few weeks ago, and also Sangeeta Dechanda, also from the Political and Economic section, who is an expert on economic energy policy. Arup and I have the overall India lead across all 7 offices for 2 very relevant sectors today. One is environmental and water technology, and the other is mining. So we work firsthand every day with U.S. and Indian organizations to build on the synergies between climate, technology, and development. Indeed, if India's economy does not increase in size, I'm not successful because I can't sell stuff, which is my core responsibility. We help U.S. companies find customers in India, and we help Indian customers find the right suppliers of technology. And I'd also be remiss if I did not acknowledge the close cooperation with the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you, Ambarish, for your cooperation with us, and we look forward to continued collaboration in a number of areas. In September, our commerce colleagues will lead delegations from India to 3 trade shows that are of interest to this organization, or to this assembly. One is Mine Expo, the world's largest mining exposition, which is only held once every 4 years, and several friends here on the dais and in the audience will be joining my colleague Shantanu Sharkar in Las Vegas for that show. We're also sending delegations to WEFTEC, the Water and Environment Federation show held every year, and also Solar Power International. So I know it's close on timing, but if anybody in this room is interested in those shows or to be notified of future opportunities to learn more about U.S. technology, please let Arup and I know. So that's the end. Or say, I've got one more thing to mention. I don't have time to go through the long list of initiatives that the rest of the U.S. government is working on with India in these areas, but suffice it to say the Department of State, the U.S. Agency for International Development, and the Department of Energy, amongst other agencies, are working very closely with the government of India and other organizations in the energy area. I would mention one new initiative that was spelled out in the last joint statement between Prime Minister Modi and President Obama, and that is the creation of a renewable energy financing hub. So more details on that. So now I'd like to tell a story. On August 29th of 2005, I was posted to the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. On that morning, back home in the United States, Hurricane Katrina struck the Gulf Coast. Katrina did $108 billion in damage, but more importantly, killed 1,833 people. So far away from home, I felt shocked and helpless. I thought, these kinds of disasters don't happen in the United States, at least not during my lifetime up till then. This event woke me up to climate change. And you can see in the Inconvenient Truth movie poster a representation of Hurricane Katrina in the form of a smoke plume. Later that fall, I had returned to Washington, D.C. A friend at the National Wildlife Federation asked if I would be interested in hearing former Vice President Al Gore talk about climate change. I jumped at the opportunity, having been a long-time admirer of Al Gore's work. I'm ashamed to say it now, but at that time, I really didn't know much about his work on climate change or about the subject in general. His presentation, he had delivered dozens or hundreds of presentations before this movie came out, and his in-person presentation terrified me. It also terrified producer Laurie David, who also listened to Al Gore speak at a different town hall meeting. Together, they made the documentary An Inconvenient Truth, which opened in the United States on May 24th, 2006, so it just celebrated its 10th anniversary. Of course, Al Gore won the Academy Award for this effort. In 2007, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his work on climate change, and he would also win a Grammy for the spoken word version of this movie. In February 2015, Al Gore came to New Delhi to train leaders for his NGO, the Climate Reality Project. I was privileged, along with Leanne Sibley, the wife of the former Consul General here, George Sibley, to be part of that training and to learn from Mr. Gore over 3 days and to become certified to give Mr. Gore's presentation on his behalf. Ambarish, Shubhadeep, and others, I'd like to personally thank you for this opportunity, as it has refocused my thinking, and I've pledged to devote more of my time and energy to addressing the challenges that will be discussed today, and I ask everyone in this room to do the same. I will give Al Gore's Climate Reality Project presentation to audiences here in Calcutta at your request. It takes about 2 hours. I'm not going to spend 2 hours today because I've only got a few minutes left. Fortunately, the timer hasn't started, so I guess I'm on free time right now. But allow me to give you a sneak preview and a bit of an update. Next slide, please. This is a picture known as Earthrise. It is the first picture of the Earth taken from space that any of us saw. It was taken Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1968, by astronaut William Anders of Apollo 8, which was the first mission to orbit the moon. Did not land on it, but orbit it. That looks awfully small, our home. There's no other place that we can live. We've been to the moon, but we can't sustain life there. There is no plan B if we destroy it. This picture inspired a great deal of thinking. And in 18 months after the world saw this picture, the modern environmental movement took shape. Senator Gaylord Nelson of my home state of Wisconsin founded Earth Day in April of 1970. The U.S. Congress passed the Clean Air Act of 1970, expanding federal oversight of clean air, and established on December 2nd, 1970, the Environmental Protection Agency. I was only 5 years old at the time, but I remember the moon missions, and I remember vividly U.S. cities being choked with smog when I was a boy, and I remember highways littered with garbage. It took time, effort, governmental intervention and regulation, but we worked together to clean up. But there's much more to do. Next slide, please. On December 7th, 1972, astronauts of Apollo 17 took the first picture of the whole Earth and dubbed it the Blue Marble. This is one of the most widely distributed photographic images in existence. It's also the last photo of the whole Earth taken by a human being. Then Vice President Gore put this up in his office in 1993. 5 years later, he asked NASA if they had another one. And they said, no, this was it. Al Gore had a vision in 1998, which finally became reality just last year in 2015. NASA, the U.S. Air Force, and the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration partnered to develop and launch the Deep Space Climate Observatory, which orbits the Earth from 1 million miles away in deep space. It is sending amazing images back to us now, available to you on the internet. I'm not going to show you that today in the interest of time. I'll return to Al Gore's original presentation, but before that, a quote from Mark Twain, who, as you may know, was no stranger to India. A quote that Mr. Gore likes to share. What gets us into trouble is not what we don't know. It's what we know for sure that just ain't so. Next slide. So one of Al Gore's early college professors, Roger Revelle, was the first person to propose measuring the amount of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere. Professor Revelle chose the most remote location possible to do measurements at altitude, at over 14,000 feet, the Mauna Loa volcano on the big island of Hawaii, so far away from industry. The jagged line is caused by the Earth breathing in the form of the deciduous forests of the northern hemisphere, which are much larger than in the southern hemisphere, leafing, and then the leaves fall and expel carbon dioxide. So while it goes up and down every year, you can see that the trend line is obvious. And that was as of about 2003. Today, the line would be about where you see the BCCI logo. It's off that chart today. Next slide. One of the most famous images from An Inconvenient Truth is Al Gore showing the relation over the last 600,000 years between temperature, okay, which is the blue line, ice ages